There's something curious about life. Many of the most valuable lessons arrive just when we feel we don't have much time left to use them. Haven't you ever looked back and thought, I wish I'd understood this 20 years earlier? That sense that certain truths show up too late is one of the great ironies of growing older. And yet, there's the gift. Every late lesson brings the chance to turn the road ahead into something more mindful, calmer, and truer. I'm Gabriel, and for more than 15 years I've studied and practiced Stoicism as a way of life. I've had the privilege of working with hundreds of people around the world, helping them discover how to live with wisdom, virtue, and above all, courage. Through those experiences, I've seen that the questions that haunt us in our 50s, 60s, or even 80s are remarkably similar. How do we let go of what hurts? How do we find peace in the midst of uncertainty? How do we give meaning to the time we have left? These are deep questions that, if we dare to face them, completely change how we move through the present. In this talk, we'll explore 19 life lessons that are almost always learned when it feels too late, but that you and I can unpack right now, without waiting for the clock to back us into a corner. This won't be a quick or superficial list. We'll pause, reflect, laugh a little at the irony of being alive, and above all, draw practical conclusions so that every day you live from today on feels lighter, wiser, and more your own. Let's begin. Number 1. No one is coming to save you. Have you ever caught yourself waiting for something or someone to rescue you? Maybe you thought that with time, your situation would magically improve, or that someone close to you would reach out a hand and pull you out of the hole. I've been there too. I remember a time in my life when everything felt like it was crashing down. Debts, relationships falling apart, and my health starting to send warning signs. In the middle of that storm, I realized I was fantasizing that someone would show up to set things right, like a secret hero sent to save me. It was a childish illusion, a comfortable self-deception, until I finally understood the obvious. That person was never coming, and that's when my real transformation began. The world doesn't owe us rescues or magical solutions. Holding on to the expectation that something external will pull us out of crisis only keeps us passive and resentful. Life, like a raging sea, will always bring storms. And if there's no captain at the helm, the ship becomes a toy of the waves. That captain is you, no one else. The difference between shipwreck and finding direction isn't in the storm itself, but in the choice to grab the wheel firmly. When I think about this, a very clear image comes to mind. Imagine you're on a lonely road at night, and your car's battery dies. Hours pass, and nobody stops. The cold seeps in, the frustration builds, until it hits you that the only one who can push the car, ask for help with resolve, or walk to the gas station is you. That feeling of self-command, though tiring, is the seed of peace. Because peace doesn't come from having an easy path, but from knowing that whatever happens, you won't sit there waiting for miracles. This is where Stoicism changed my life. Epictetus said it plainly. Take control of what depends on you. Accept the rest as it comes. I didn't stumble on that line in some dusty book at the library. It found me in a simple blog I discovered during a sleepless night, desperately searching for an answer. And believe me, it didn't give me instant comfort. It hit me like a slap to the forehead, as if it were saying, enough complaining, move. From that day on, I've divided every problem into two, what I can control and what I can't. And on that first side, where I do have power, I act, even if my hands are shaking. I want to invite you to try a practical exercise, almost like a small ritual. Take a blank sheet of paper and draw a line down the middle. On the left, write everything that worries you today, but doesn't depend on you. Other people's opinions, the past, the global economy. On the right, write down what is under your control, your discipline, your words, your attitude, your physical care. Now, from that right-hand list, pick 3 things you can do in the next 24 hours, even small ones. Do them. Don't overthink it. Just do them. And notice how your feeling of helplessness shifts into one of direction. Do you see it? The greatest trap in life isn't difficulty itself, but the illusion of waiting for outside saviors. While you wait, Time slips away, and when you finally react, you may have already lost precious opportunities. That's why I say, don't wait any longer. Grab the wheel, even if the sea is rough, even if you're afraid. Because fear never disappears completely, but it does transform once you move. And I want to leave you with this thought. No one is coming to save you. And far from being a tragedy, that is your greatest freedom. It means you're the one who decides where to steer. And trust me, there's nothing more powerful than realizing the captain of your ship is never late. Because the captain has always been there. It's you. Number 2, learn to lose in time. There's something that took me years to accept. Not everything you start has to be finished. I grew up with the idea that if you've already invested time, money, or effort, you can't let it go. Maybe you've felt that too, staying in a job that drains you, in a relationship that only leaves scars, or clinging to a project that never takes off, just because you think, I've already put in too much to quit now. There's a name for that in psychology, the sunk cost fallacy. And while it sounds academic, in real life it's simply the art of chaining yourself to something that's already beyond saving. I remember a woman I worked with in reflection sessions. She had spent over 20 years in a marriage that was nothing but an emotional desert. She told me, "But how can I leave now if I've invested half my life?" That phrase had her trapped, and I asked her, "How much more are you willing to invest just to keep not getting what you need?" She went silent, and in that silence she understood that staying was also a loss. That day she decided to leave, not out of rebellion, but out of self-respect. And with time, she told me, I learned that losing in time is also winning. Life is a lot like a garden. A gardener who never prunes, who clings to every dead branch for fear of hurting the tree, ends up watching the whole thing wither. Pruning isn't cruelty, it's love. And sometimes our lives are full of dry branches. Friendships that only exist in memory, commitments we carry out of guilt, habits that no longer serve us. If you don't prune, there's no space for new growth. Here's something simple yet powerful. Close your eyes and imagine 2 futures for yourself. The first, if you choose to stay in what wears you down today, what will your life look like in 5 years? How will you feel each morning? What part of you will fade away? Now imagine the other path. If you have the courage to let go, even if it hurts, how would your life look? What new space would open? What peace would arrive? Which version would you rather live in? That contrast isn't a game, it's a mirror. And here's something practical. Design an exit plan. It's not about cutting everything off suddenly and in anger, but about doing it with clarity and respect. First, name what no longer serves you. Second, set a deadline to let it go. And third, perform a symbolic act of closure. It could be writing a letter, donating something that represents that stage, or even taking a long walk to tell yourself, this is behind me. Symbols help the soul process what the mind has already decided. I know losing in time hurts. It feels like throwing away years of effort, but think about it. What weighs more? The loss you've already suffered, or the loss you'll keep suffering if you stay? That's the real dilemma. Accepting early loss is like a scalpel. It cuts, yes, but it also heals. I want you to remember this line. What you release in time isn't lost. It becomes space for what truly deserves to grow. And when you have to choose between carrying something dead or making room for something alive, remember the gardener. Pruning is also love. Number 3, your body is your first savings account. When I was younger, I thought the body was almost indestructible, as if excesses and neglect were just a normal part of life. Little sleep, bad food, ignoring signs of fatigue, and of course, you think you can postpone taking care of your body indefinitely until one day it hands you the bill. That happened to me when an injury forced me to stop cold. It was an uncomfortable season, because suddenly I discovered that without physical energy, the mind clouds over, your mood collapses, and even your relationships feel heavy. That's when I realized the body isn't an accessory. It's the most basic capital, the first savings account everything else depends on. The funny thing is, we usually take better care of money than our bodies. We check our bank account every week, but let years go by without checking on our strength, our rest, our mobility. and then we're surprised when fatigue and aches come charging us outrageous interest. Here's an uncomfortable truth. You can't live wisely if your body is falling apart. Virtue needs energy to stand, patience, temperance, inner strength. All of that is also fueled by a body that can carry you through the day without collapsing. I'm not talking about obsession or chasing impossible ideals of youth. I'm talking about 4 simple, non-negotiable pillars that make a huge difference after 50. The first is deep sleep. Without real rest, nothing works. The second is muscle strength. Being able to carry your own bags, climb stairs, move without depending on others. The third is mindful walking, that humble exercise that balances body and mind. And the fourth is getting enough protein without extremes to sustain the muscle mass we naturally lose with age. If you can maintain those 4 pillars, you already have solid capital. I want to suggest a 7-day mini experiment. Go to bed and wake up at the same time, eat 2 simple and complete meals, and take a half-hour walk each day. At the end of the week, record how your mood, mental clarity, and energy level have changed. You'll be surprised. Sometimes we think we need complicated formulas, when what truly transforms us is returning to what's simple and consistent. There's also a tool I practice myself whenever I feel tension. Slow, deep breathing. 5 minutes of inhaling gently, holding, and exhaling longer. It may seem like nothing, but it's a reset for your nervous system. And the best part is you can do it anywhere. In bed, in the living room, even while waiting for someone. That habit has been, for me, like opening a window in a closed room. And here, I want to remind you of something important. This channel, the Stoic Garden, is a space to learn together how to live with dignity, self-respect, and inner peace. If what you've heard so far resonates with you, I invite you to subscribe, give this video a like, and let me know in the comments which country you're watching from. I love seeing where this community is growing from, because in the end, you're not alone on this path. We are many seeking the same thing. Let's continue. Number 4. Almost nobody is thinking about you. Sounds harsh, right? But it's freeing. We spend a big part of our lives worrying about what others will say, how we look, how we speak, how we decide. We hold back out of fear of judgment, as if we were living on a stage where everyone else is a ruthless critic. The truth is, most people are too busy dealing with their own problems to stop and dissect yours. When I understood this, I felt a mix of laughter and relief. I remember once doing a little personal experiment. I left home with my shirt on backwards, on purpose. It was a light-colored shirt, obvious enough that anyone could notice. Walking down the street felt like being under a spotlight. But you know what happened? Nothing. Nobody said a word. Nobody looked at me strangely. Everyone was wrapped up in their own world, thinking about getting to work, the traffic, the call they had to make. That day confirmed for me that most of our embarrassments only exist in our heads. Modern psychology calls this the spotlight effect. We believe everyone is watching our every move, when in reality most people don't even notice. And here's the gift. If almost no one thinks about you as much as you believe, then you're free. Free to try, free to fail, free to do what really matters to you without carrying the fiction of, what will they say? Let me ask you an uncomfortable question. What would you do tomorrow if you knew no one was evaluating you, no one was keeping score against you? Maybe you'd sing without fear. Maybe you'd start that project you've been postponing. Or maybe you'd dress how you truly want, not how tradition dictates. Imagining that scenario reveals how much of our life is chained to an opinion that, in practice, doesn't even exist. I want to challenge you with a small exercise. For 1 week, choose one small act of courage each day. It could be talking to someone who intimidates you, asking for a discount at a store, or giving your honest opinion in a conversation. Do it as if you were invisible, as if no one were watching. At the end of the day, write down what actually happened. I promise you the world won't collapse, and you'll feel a little lighter. I've tried this many times myself, and every time I confirm the same thing. Freedom doesn't come from everyone applauding you, but from realizing that their eyes don't weigh nearly as much as you thought. In fact, when you act with honesty and courage, the opposite often happens. You inspire others to do the same, because we're all tired of pretending just to fit in. So hold on to this idea. Life is not a theater where the audience silently observes you. It's more like a street full of distracted passers-by who barely notice you walking by. And once you understand that, you start performing for applause and start living for yourself. Less theater, more life lived. Number 5. Boundaries are not a lack of love. How many times have I heard that poisonous phrase, "If you really loved me, you wouldn't say no"? And for years, I admit, I let myself be dragged down by that guilt disguised as affection. I allowed things I didn't want. I accepted burdens that weren't mine, just out of fear that if I set a boundary, I'd be called selfish or cold. And of course, the result was always the same. I ended up exhausted, resentful, and with the nagging feeling that my love was never enough. Until I finally understood something crucial. Boundaries aren't walls against love. They're the fence that protects it. The problem is that many people confuse kindness with weakness. We believe being good means saying yes to everything, enduring everything, keeping quiet about everything. But true kindness is rooted in firmness, because when you always give in, you're not really giving love. You're giving fear of losing someone's approval, and that dynamic only erodes the dignity of both sides. I remember a case close to home, in my own family. Those endless late-night phone calls with no respect for time, full of demands that weren't even urgent. I used to always pick up, afraid of looking bad. Until one day I decided to say, "Look, I'll be happy to talk with you in the afternoon, but not at night. I need to rest." What happened? At first there were complaints, yes. But over time, respect showed up. Because a clear boundary is also a declaration of value. This is who I am, this is what I need, and if you love me, you'll accept me as I am. Here's a practical exercise for you. Write down 3 non-negotiable boundaries in your life. Not 10, not 20, just 3. They can be simple. Not answering the phone during meals, not lending money you can't give, not tolerating disrespect. Once you've written them, practice the short phrase that communicates them. No, because I can't. No decorations, no endless explanations. Just the calm clarity of someone who respects themselves. I like to think of boundaries as the doors of a house. If you have no doors, anyone can walk in and do whatever they want with you. But when there are clear doors, you can open them to those you love and close them to what harms you. It's not rejection, it's order. It's not selfishness, it's self-respect. And here's a question that may feel uncomfortable. To whom are you saying yes when deep down you want to say no? Recognizing it is the first step toward freeing your life from that invisible prison. So hold on to this. Boundaries don't take love away, they make it possible. Because only when you protect your space can you give a genuine yes, one that doesn't come from guilt or fear, but from freedom. And that yes, believe me, is the truest love there is. Number 6. Time is invested, not spent. There's a big lie we repeat without noticing. I don't have time. But the truth is, we do have time. The problem is we invest it in things that give us no return. And life, if you think about it, is the fairest wallet that exists. Every day you receive 24 new hours. No more, no less. The question isn't how much time you have, but what you're putting it into. Not long ago, I did an exercise that shook me. I sat down with a calendar and counted how many Sundays I might still have left if I lived to 80. The number was concrete, finite, not theoretical, just a few hundred Sundays. And I asked myself, do I really want to spend those Sundays glued to a screen? Or would I rather invest them in a coffee with someone I love, a walk under the trees, a conversation that nourishes my spirit? When you do that math, time stops being smoke and turns into measurable gold. The problem is, we usually live as if time were unlimited. We leave the things that really matter for when there's a spare moment. That visit with a sibling, that call you keep putting off, that simple evening walk. And the truth is, the spare moment never arrives, because the urgent always devours the important. That's why I prefer to talk about afternoons with a name. Open your calendar and label it. Afternoon with Anna, Sunday with the grandkids, morning of silence. If you don't schedule it, it doesn't exist. Here's a simple practice that can change your perspective. Trade 1 hour of screen time for 1 hour of real conversation. An hour you might have spent scrolling through feeds. Replace it with a walk with someone you care about, or with writing in a journal. Do it for a week and notice the impact on your mood. You'll see how that investment, though small, pays dividends of peace. I like to picture time as an investment portfolio. Some minutes are expenses that yield nothing. Pointless arguments, comparisons, worries that never come true. Other minutes are investments that generate interest in peace. A long hug, shared laughter, a sincere prayer. You get to choose where to place your resources. And trust me, old age feels much lighter when you look back and see you invested wisely. Now let me nudge you a bit. If you had only 100 afternoons left to live, how would you spend them? Would you let routine swallow them up? Or would you give them names to make them memorable? This question isn't meant to scare you, but to wake you up. Because time, when seen up close, always comes with a price. So remember, time isn't spent, it's invested. And the wisest thing you can do is place it where life multiplies, not where it fades away. Every minute you choose consciously is a brick that builds the house of your peace. Number 7. Character first, image second. We live obsessed with what others think of us. We worry about reputation, appearance, how people perceive us. But tell me this, what good is the world's applause if, when you're alone with yourself, you can't look in the mirror in peace? That's the difference between reputation and character. Reputation is what others believe you are. Character is what you actually do when no one is watching, and sooner or later, the second always catches up with the first. I remember a story that left a deep mark on me. I once met a carpenter with a peculiar habit. He polished the back of his furniture with the same care as the front, the part no one would ever see. One day, I asked him why, and his answer was simple and powerful. Because I know it's there. That lesson stayed with me. The value of doing things with integrity, even if no one is watching, even if you'll never get applause for it. The problem is that society trains us the opposite way. It tells us, look flawless, even if you're crumbling inside. That creates a life of theater, of masks, of constant exhaustion. But when you choose to build character, you stop living for applause and start living for your conscience. And believe me, conscience is the toughest judge, but also the fairest. Here's a small challenge. Try a day without digital mirrors. Turn off social media. Don't post anything. Don't measure your worth by likes or outside attention. Dedicate that day to acting as if no one would ever find out what you did. Would you still do it the same way? Would you put in the same effort, the same dedication, the same honesty? That day will show you how much of your life depends on outside eyes and how much on your own internal standard. I remember the first time I tried this. It was uncomfortable. I caught myself wanting to tell someone what I had done well, as if I needed witnesses. And that's when I realized how much I still depended on outside applause. But over time, it became freeing. Now, when I finish something, I ask myself only, am I proud of this? Even if no one else sees it. That question became my compass. Stoicism also speaks about this with clarity. Epictetus said we shouldn't aim to be admired, but to be good. When I came across that line during one of my early morning study sessions, I understood that virtue doesn't need a stage. Virtue grows in the unseen, in the everyday, in those small acts that never make it into a photo. And it's there that character is forged. So I want you to remember this. Reputation may open doors, but only character lets you sleep in peace. And when you have to choose between the mask and the truth, remember the carpenter who polished the invisible. Because what you do when no one is watching, that's who you are. And in the end, that's the only thing that matters. Number 8. Fewer things, more life. There comes a moment in life when you realize that what weighs you down isn't the years, but the things you've accumulated. Things you no longer use, things you keep just in case, things staring at you from the closet like ghosts from the past. I had that revelation during a move. I opened boxes I hadn't touched in decades and discovered that half of what I owned wasn't useful objects, but reminders of guilt, broken promises, and stages of life that no longer existed. It felt like carrying a biography made of clutter, and that's when I understood that excess steals life. The problem is, we believe that accumulating gives us security. We hold on to clothes that no longer fit, gadgets that no longer work, papers we'll never read again, and without noticing, our homes turn into museums of someday. But the truth is that someday never comes, and in the meantime, we live trapped among things that drain our space and energy. I love the metaphor of the merchant in the desert. Picture a man weighed down with precious stones trying to cross burning sand. At first, he believes they are his wealth, but as he walks, the load becomes unbearable, until one day he finds a well of water and realizes that, in the desert, water is worth far more than all the jewels. That's exactly what happens to us. We carry stones believing they're treasures, when what we really need is lightness, space, and calm. Here's a simple practice I suggest: the 90-day box. Take a big box and put in everything you haven't used in months. Write the date on it. If 90 days pass and you haven't taken anything out, then you don't need it. Donate it, give it away, let it go. This method frees more than you can imagine, because every object that leaves creates square meters of serenity in your mind. I remember that after trying this exercise, my home felt completely different. More air, more clarity, less visual noise. And the curious thing was that along with the external order came internal order too. I began sleeping better, focusing more, even feeling lighter emotionally. It's as if objects hold emotions, and by letting them go, you release pieces of invisible weight as well. Let me ask you something. How many of the things you keep today truly represent who you are now? And how many are just relics of who you used to be? That question can sting, but it also opens the door to a more honest present. So remember this. Every object you let go of is not a loss, but a gift of space for the life you actually want to live. Because in the end, fewer things doesn't mean less life. It means more air, more freedom, more you. Number 9. Money without peace is useless. Money is an uncomfortable subject. On one hand, we all need it. On the other, we're afraid to talk about it, as if it were taboo. The truth is, many people spend their lives accumulating or chasing money, but never learn how to live at peace with it. What good are full accounts if your heart stays empty? What good is saving every penny if anxiety keeps you from enjoying what you already have? Money is an excellent servant, but a terrible master. I remember a story I heard in my youth, one I understood better with time: the tale of the fisherman and the banker. A businessman tells a fisherman that instead of catching only what he needs each day, he should work harder, buy more boats, expand, get rich, and once he's a millionaire, then he'll finally be able to rest and enjoy life. The fisherman smiles and replies, "But that's exactly what I already do now. I catch what I need, spend the afternoon with my family, and sleep in peace." That simple story reveals the trap so many fall into: postponing joy for a future that may never arrive. I'm not saying money doesn't matter. Of course it does. It pays for a roof, food, medicine. But when you make it your only goal, peace disappears. What matters isn't how much you have, but how you use it. I learned to divide my income in a very simple way, almost like a ritual. One part for peace, things that truly nourish me. One part for giving, because money shared multiplies its meaning. And one part for learning, because investing in knowledge and health yields more than any bank. It's not about big numbers, it's about intention. Here's something practical you can try: the envelope method. Take 3 envelopes or separate accounts and label them: peace, generosity, learning. Every time you receive money, even a small amount, put something into each envelope. At the end of a month, notice how your relationship with money changes. It stops being an abstract mass that slips away and becomes a resource with purpose. Now let me ask you, when was the last time you spent money on something that truly gave you life, instead of spending it on what you thought you should have? The answer might be uncomfortable, but it can also be revealing. Because there's no greater poverty than living in material abundance while starving for serenity. So remember this: Money without peace is useless. What matters is the money that sustains your dignity, that allows you to give, that feeds your spirit. The rest is just sterile accumulation. And when you have to choose between having more and living better, remember the fisherman. Maybe the wealth was already in the simple things you were overlooking. Number 10. Friendships that lift you up. There's a phrase I heard years ago that has stayed with me. Show me your friends and I'll show you your future. With time, I've seen how true it is. The people you share your life with shape your mood, your decisions, and even the way you talk to yourself. A good friend can lift you on a bad day, and bad company can drag you down even when life is going well. It's not about quantity, it's about quality. I remember a walk with a longtime friend. That day, without sugarcoating, we told each other what we admired about one another and also what was hurting us. It was an uncomfortable conversation, but healing. By the end, we felt our friendship had risen a step higher, as if we had cleared the air. That's the kind of relationship that sustains the soul, the ones that make you grow instead of shrink. The problem is that often we maintain relationships out of habit, fear of being alone, or not wanting to upset anyone. And without realizing it, those friendships turn into emotional cages. The question we should always ask ourselves is simple. Does this person lift me up or drain me? Do they inspire me to be better or keep me stuck in mediocrity? The answer usually lies in how you feel after each encounter. If you leave with more energy and clarity, that relationship adds to your life. If you leave exhausted, confused, or more insecure, that relationship subtracts. Here's a practice I suggest: the social energy test. For 1 week, keep track of how you feel after being with each person. Don't analyze with your head. Listen with your body. Do you feel light or heavy? Encouraged or drained? Ready to move forward or ready to hide? At the end of the week, you'll have an honest map of who lifts you and who pulls you down. I tried this exercise and was surprised. I realized that some people I met out of obligation left me completely drained, while others, whom I rarely spoke with, gave me incredible clarity. From then on, I decided to reorder my circles. Spend more time with those who add and put distance with those who take away. It wasn't easy. There was guilt and pushback, but in the long run, it gave me peace. Think of your life as a campfire. Each true friend is a log that keeps the fire alive, and each toxic friendship is a bucket of water that puts it out. The choice is clear. Surround yourself with those who feed your fire, even if they're few. Because in old age, more than ever, what matters isn't how many people you have around, but how real the few who remain are. So remember this: one true friendship that lifts you up is worth more than 100 acquaintances who keep you stuck in the same place. Seek out, cultivate, and protect those relationships that are both refuge and fuel. Because in the end, true friendships are like wings. They don't carry you, but they help you fly higher. Number 11. Forgive yourself and move on. There are guilts that pierce like thorns, and if we don't tend to them, they end up poisoning everything. Maybe you've found yourself remembering a mistake from 20 or 30 years ago and still feeling that knot in your stomach. I carried guilt like that too, believing punishment was necessary to prove I had learned. But I discovered that misplaced guilt doesn't teach, it destroys. What teaches is forgiveness, starting with the one we give ourselves. There's a huge difference between useful guilt and toxic guilt. The first is that voice that says, "You messed up, do what you can to make it right." The second is the one that repeats endlessly, "You're worthless, you don't deserve anything, you always fail." The first moves you forward, the second paralyzes you. And the sad thing is that many of us stay trapped in that second one, as if living in a mental prison with no way out. Here's an exercise that was freeing for me. Write a letter of self-forgiveness. Not to justify yourself or downplay what happened, but to acknowledge the mistake, express the lesson, and put a period at the end. The letter can have 3 parts. This happened, this is what I learned, here I leave it. Write it, read it out loud, and either keep it or burn it, whatever your heart needs. Symbols have enormous power to release what the mind insists on holding. In my readings, I found a verse that always stays with me on this subject. As far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us. Psalm 103:12. When I first read it, the clarity of the metaphor struck me. It's not about denying mistakes, but about understanding that they can be placed so far away they no longer define who you are today. That's what true forgiveness does. I also remember a time I tried to ask someone for forgiveness, and that person refused to hear it. It was painful because I was hoping for reconciliation. But over time I understood that forgiving and forgiving myself didn't depend on that external response. The closure was within me. That's when I let go of the need to control how others receive my apologies. Let me ask you, how many times do you judge yourself more harshly than you would ever judge someone you love? If your answer is many, then it's time to rethink that inner treatment. Because if you can't forgive yourself, you live forever in debt to yourself. So remember this. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it does open the present. Forgive yourself and move on. Because staying trapped in what was doesn't change anything, but freeing yourself from that weight gives you back the right to walk light. And in life, the only path worth walking is the one that leads forward. Number 12, solitude well lived. There's a kind of solitude that weighs like a stone, the one that feels like abandonment, emptiness, condemnation. But there's also another kind, much deeper and brighter, that becomes a workshop for the soul. That's solitude well lived. The problem is that almost no one teaches us to tell the difference. We spend half our lives running from being alone, seeking noise, forced company, endless distractions, just to avoid listening to what we carry inside. And yet, sooner or later, life confronts you with solitude. That's when the great question arises. Will you live it as punishment or as a space for creation? I remember once doing an improvised retreat right in the middle of the city. I didn't go to the mountains or a monastery. I simply turned off my phone, stopped replying to messages, and gave myself 24 hours to walk, read, and write in silence. It was uncomfortable, like tearing off a blindfold and suddenly being blinded by the sun. But after a few hours, what began as anxiety turned into calm. I discovered that beneath the noise there was an inner territory waiting to be explored. Solitude well lived is like an honest mirror. It shows you what you've been postponing, those uncomfortable questions, forgotten dreams, emotions you've been covering up with activity. That's why it scares us. Because looking at ourselves without masks hurts. But it's a pain that heals, because it gives you the chance to reconcile with yourself. Here's a small experiment for you. A 24-hour urban retreat. No long trips needed, just one day with yourself. Phone on airplane mode, a long, unhurried walk, a coffee in silence, a notebook to write down whatever comes up. Nothing more. Do it, and notice what voices appear when you quiet the external noise. I assure you, there will be discomfort, but also clarity. To illustrate this, I like to tell a little story I made up that captures this teaching well. They say that in a park lived a hermit invisible to everyone else. No one could see him, but he saw them all. He watched people running back and forth, rushing, noisy, complaining. And every so often, someone worn out by the chaos would wander near. Then the hermit would say, "Stay here for a while. Silence won't bite you, but it will show you who you are." Some ran away frightened, others stayed and discovered that silence was, in fact, company. Let me ask you, when was the last time you were alone without feeling the need to fill that space with television, phone calls, or food? The answer says a lot about your relationship with yourself. So remember this. Solitude well lived is not isolation. It's encounter. It's not abandonment. It's a return home. And when you learn to be with yourself without fear, then you can truly be with others from a place that is more authentic, freer, and fuller. Number 13. Speak the uncomfortable. There are silences that look like peace, but are really time bombs. What you swallow to avoid conflict, what you keep quiet to not make things awkward, eventually rots and explodes. That cheap peace we buy with silence comes at a high cost. Resentment, wounds of the soul, relationships that break without explanation. I learned this after losing a friendship that never recovered. We never said what bothered us, and that emptiness grew until it separated us. The price of silence was higher than that of a difficult conversation. The problem is that we often confuse honesty with aggression. We think speaking the uncomfortable means fighting, when really it's about choosing words that open paths instead of building walls. The key is learning to say what needs to be said with clarity, care, and direction. I like to call it the 3 C's method: clarity, care, and course. Clarity so you don't get lost in detours, care so you don't wound unnecessarily, and course to point the way forward after what's been said. Let me give you a real example. I once worked on a project with a colleague who constantly missed deadlines, and it was dragging me down too. I could have stayed silent and built up anger, but I chose to speak. I told him clearly what was happening, carefully so it wouldn't feel like a personal attack, and with a course, how we could reorganize things differently. The result? Of course, it wasn't a comfortable chat, but that timely conversation saved the project and in the process our working relationship. To break the inertia of silence, I use a technique that has helped me: 2 minutes of courage. You don't need to be brave all day, just for those first 2 minutes when you decide to open your mouth and begin the conversation. Once you say it, the rest flows. The biggest obstacle is always the first sentence. Now let me ask you, what conversation are you avoiding today because you're afraid of making someone uncomfortable? What do you keep quiet every time you think, better not say anything? That silence isn't peace, it's debt. And emotional debt always comes with interest. This isn't about speaking without filters or using honesty as a weapon. It's about daring to say what matters before it rots, and doing it with the balance of the 3 C's. When you speak the uncomfortable with love and firmness, you free yourself and give the other person the chance to grow too. So remember this: silence may seem easier, but in the long run, it destroys. Speaking the uncomfortable, even when it hurts, is the real medicine of relationships. Because what is said in time may sting for a moment, but what's left unsaid for too long stings for a lifetime. Number 14, turn envy into learning. Envy is like that awkward neighbor no one wants to admit they have, yet who always shows up. We feel ashamed to confess it, so we disguise it as indifference, criticism, gossip. But deep down, it's there. That knot in the stomach when someone achieves what we longed for. I've felt that sting myself, watching someone reach a goal I had postponed. For a long time, I saw it as a shameful flaw, a stain on my character, until I realized that envy, when seen clearly, is actually a compass. Because if you think about it, isn't it curious that we only envy what we secretly wish for ourselves? You never envy what doesn't matter to you. That discomfort, then, isn't punishment. It's a signal. The problem is that instead of using it to learn, we usually use it to compare and beat ourselves down. And that's when envy rots. Once, while working with a colleague who seemed to be advancing in leaps while I felt stuck, I caught myself sinking into that sense of inferiority. Instead of spiraling, I chose to observe, what was he doing that I wasn't? What discipline? What habits? What choices? That shift changed everything. Instead of competing, I started learning. And I discovered that what I admired in him were things I could also cultivate. If I stopped wasting time on comparison, here's a simple but powerful exercise. Every time you feel envy, instead of hiding it, write in a notebook. What is this showing me about what I desire for myself? Turn the sting into curiosity. That admiration journal becomes a clear map of what really matters in your life. With time, you'll notice envy softening and transforming into motivation. The Bible also addresses this directly. Ecclesiastes 4:4 says, "I saw that all toil and all skill in work come from a man's envy of his neighbor." This too is vanity and chasing after the wind. When I read that passage, I understood that envy as a driving force always leads to emptiness. But if you use it as a mirror for learning, it stops being affliction and becomes guidance. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Who do you secretly envy? What do they have that you wish you did? The answer may give you more clarity about your own path than 1,000 pieces of outside advice. So remember this: envy is not a shameful sin. It's a misused compass. If you stop hiding it and look at it honestly, it becomes a teacher. Because in the end, every time you feel envy, you're not really seeing the other person. You're seeing yourself in a mirror that's telling you, this can be yours too, if you choose to work for it. Number 15, look death in the eye. Talking about death always feels uncomfortable. We spend our lives avoiding it, as if ignoring it could somehow delay its arrival. But death doesn't negotiate, doesn't give exact notice, doesn't wait for us to tie up loose ends. And though it may sound paradoxical, looking it in the eye isn't an invitation to sadness. It's an invitation to live more fully. Because only when you accept that time is finite does each day take on a different value. I remember a scene in a hospital that marked me forever. I was accompanying a relative in their final days. I went with fear, with the awkwardness we usually carry when facing someone else's suffering. But what I saw wasn't only pain, it was a kind of lucidity rarely found in daily life. That person told me, don't waste time on what doesn't matter. Simple words, but packed with a truth only someone at the edge dares to speak. From that moment on, I decided I didn't want to wait until I was lying in a bed to understand what's essential. The Stoics practiced what they called memento mori. Remember you will die. Not as something morbid, but as a compass. Marcus Aurelius wrote that each day should be lived as if it were the last, because one of them will be. I adopted a small practice inspired by that, carrying a tiny stone in my pocket. Every time I touch it, I remember this day will never repeat. Whether I'm in the middle of an argument or stuck in routine, that stone reminds me I'm alive now, and tomorrow is not guaranteed. Montaigne, the French philosopher, said that rehearsing for death is rehearsing for freedom. When I first read that, early in my studies, I thought it was just another poetic phrase. But with time, I realized it was literal. When you make peace with death, life stops intimidating you. You no longer live in such a rush, no longer obsess over accumulating, no longer postpone what matters. To rehearse death is to learn how to let go of the fear that chains us. Here's a visualization I suggest. Imagine today were your last day. What would you do differently? Who would you call? What would you drop? Where would you put your energy? This exercise isn't meant to depress you, but to wake you up. Because every time you live as if it were your last day, you strip away the superficial and hold on to the essential. So remember this, looking at death doesn't bring you closer to the end. It brings you closer to life. Because when you accept you are not eternal, you start savoring coffee more slowly, hugging more tightly, saying, I love you, without saving it for tomorrow. In the end, death is not the enemy. The real enemy is living as if you were immortal, wasting what you do have in your hands today. Number 16. Your purpose is to serve. There's a big confusion in modern life. We think purpose is measured in fame, in visible achievements, in being remembered by crowds. But the truth is much simpler and at the same time more demanding. Real purpose is found in serving. Not in grand heroic gestures, but in the small acts that ease someone else's burden. Serving doesn't make you less. It makes you greater. Because when you serve from the heart, you stop revolving around your own ego and connect with something much bigger. I think of a neighbor from my childhood, a simple man who never sought recognition. Every Sunday he would cook a huge pot of food and share it with the elderly on the block. No cameras, no speeches, just action. And the transformation was visible. In those homes where there had been loneliness, there were now laughter and the smell of home cooking. That man was never famous, but he left deeper marks than many who appear on television. His life taught me that true success isn't measured in followers, but in footprints. Viktor Frankl, survivor of concentration camps, wrote that life's meaning isn't invented. It's discovered in responsibility towards something or someone beyond yourself. When I read Man's Search for Meaning, one line struck me. The more one forgets oneself, by giving to a cause or to another person, the more human he is, and the more he actualizes himself. That idea changed me. I understood then that the existential void isn't filled with distractions, but with dedication. Here's something concrete you can try. Create your signature of service. It doesn't have to be spectacular, just 3 weekly acts, repeatable and measurable, where you serve without expecting applause. It could be visiting someone who's lonely, cooking to share, teaching something you know. Write it down, commit to it, and follow through. That habit builds a purpose as solid as a cathedral, brick by brick. Let me ask you, when have you felt most alive, most fulfilled? I guarantee it wasn't when you bought something, but when you gave something. That fullness you feel when you help, even in small ways, is the clearest clue to your purpose. So remember this. Your purpose is to serve. Not because the world demands it, but because your soul needs it. When you serve, your life stops revolving around what you lack and centers on what you can give. And in that outward movement, the miracle happens. You realize meaning was never missing, only ego was in excess. Number 17, say no without guilt. For a long time, I thought saying no was selfish, almost a betrayal of others. I believed I always had to be available, always willing, always saying yes. And of course, I ended up exhausted, resentful, and feeling like my life was ruled by other people's expectations. Until I discovered something. Every time you say yes to what you don't want, you're saying no to yourself. And with time, that bill gets very expensive. What we need to learn is the art of the complete no. Brief, clear, and without endless justifications. Saying no without embellishments, without inventing excuses, without writing a novel to explain your reasons. A calm, firm, and respectful no is far more dignified than a resentful yes. And believe me, people end up respecting more those who know how to set boundaries than those who always give in. I remember an invitation I received years ago. It was well-intentioned, a social event, but I knew I didn't have the energy for it. Before, I would have accepted, swallowing my exhaustion. That day, I calmly replied, "Thanks for thinking of me, but I can't." Period. No extras. At first, I felt guilty, as if I'd committed a crime. But the guilt faded quickly. The peace of having been honest with myself lasted much longer. Let me suggest a couple of practical tools. The first is to prepare a short response template for those situations where you know you'll say no. I appreciate it, but I can't. That's not possible for me right now. Thank you, but no. Write them down, memorize them, and use them. They'll save you from getting caught in the tangle of excuses that end up draining you more than the yes itself. The second is the kind delay technique. Don't answer on the spot. When someone asks you for something and you're not sure, respond, "I'll let you know tomorrow." That 24-hour pause gives you space to think whether you truly want to do it or if you're just reacting out of guilt or pressure. And believe me, the clarity that comes in that pause changes many decisions. Now let me ask you directly, how many times this week have you said yes when you wanted to say no? If the answer is more than once, then it's time to train your no like a muscle. So remember this, saying no isn't selfish, it's respect. It's declaring that your time, your energy, and your life have value. And when you learn to say it without guilt, you'll find that your yes becomes more authentic, more free, and more powerful. Because a yes born of freedom is always worth more than 1,000 yeses dragged out of obligation. Number 18. Asking for help is strength. We've been sold the idea that absolute independence is a sign of strength, as if needing someone else were the same as being weak. And many of us grew up with that mentality. Tough it out alone, don't bother anyone, figure it out yourself. The problem is that this extreme self-sufficiency ends up being a prison. The truth is, no one lives completely alone, and admitting you need help doesn't make you weaker, it makes you more human. I learned this the hard way. There was a time in my life when everything felt like it was falling apart. Work, health, relationships. My pride told me I had to carry it all myself, that asking for support would reveal fragility. Until one day, exhausted, I called a friend and said, "I can't anymore, I need to talk." That simple act of opening my mouth changed everything. It didn't magically solve my problems, but it gave me air, company, perspective. And I realized that asking for help is like opening a window. It lets oxygen in where before there was suffocation. The key is doing it with clarity. It's not about throwing out a vague, help me that leaves the other person unsure what to do. It's about making a specific, concrete, measurable request. For example, can you come with me to the doctor on Tuesday? Can you go over this document with me? Can you listen to me for 15 minutes without interrupting? Clear requests generate clear support, and they strengthen bonds because they show trust. Here's a practical exercise. Make your 3 calls list. Write down 3 people you could reach out to if you needed to. Define what you'd ask each of them and when. You don't have to use it right away, but having it reminds you that you're not alone in the world. And when the storm comes, you won't have to improvise. You'll know who to turn to and how. It's also important to practice the art of receiving. Often we ask for help, and when it's offered, we respond with shame or excuses. You didn't have to. Sorry to bother you. That cuts the flow. Receiving with gratitude, without justifying yourself, is also an act of strength. It means recognizing that someone can give you something and you accept it with dignity. Let me ask you, what's stopping you from asking for help? Is it pride, fear of criticism, or the belief that you have to handle everything? Identifying that resistance is the first step to dismantling it. So remember this, asking for help isn't giving up. It's being brave. Brave because you expose yourself, you trust, you acknowledge your limits. And in that honesty arises true strength. The strength of someone who knows life is walked better together. Number 19. Take care of your mental narrative. What makes us suffer the most isn't always the events themselves, but the stories we tell ourselves about them. The mind is a tireless storyteller, and sometimes it invents cruel tales with us as the main characters. If someone doesn't reply to a message, the mind says, "They're ignoring me. I don't matter." If we make a mistake, the mind whispers, "I'm a failure." And the strange thing is, we end up believing those stories more than reality itself. I discovered this trap when I read about Albert Ellis, the psychologist who created rational emotive behavior therapy. He said we don't suffer because of events, but because of the beliefs we build around them. He came up with the ABC technique. A is the activating event, B is the belief, C is the consequence. In other words, it's not the fact that determines how we feel, but what we believe about it. Practicing this in my own life was a radical shift. Here's a simple example. Event. My friend didn't call me on my birthday. Belief. I don't matter to him, I'm alone. Consequence. Sadness and resentment. But if I change the belief to something more realistic, he was probably busy. That doesn't mean he doesn't care. The emotional consequence becomes much lighter. The fact stays the same. The story I tell myself changes everything. Here's an exercise in rewriting I'd like to suggest. Think of a recent situation that made you suffer. Write it down with the ABC model, identify the belief that torments you, and replace it with one that's more accurate and compassionate. Then notice how your emotional state shifts. It's amazing how, when the story changes, the experience changes too. The Bible also gives us a clear guide on this. In Philippians 4:8 it says, "Whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, think about such things." When I read that passage in a tough time, I realized it was like a mental checklist. Is this thought I'm having true? Is it fair? Is it kind? If not, why am I feeding it? I often close this practice with a visualization. I imagine my future self speaking to me with respect and patience. And I ask, what words would that wiser self use to talk to me now? That image helps me replace the critical voice with a guiding one, more humane, more encouraging. Let me throw you an uncomfortable question. What story are you telling yourself today that isn't true, but that you're living as if it were? The answer to that question could free you from an enormous weight. So remember this, your peace depends less on what happens outside and more on what you narrate inside. Take care of your mental narrative, because that inner voice is what ultimately builds your reality. And if you learn to speak to yourself with truth and respect, you'll discover that many chains were nothing more than words. We've walked through 19 lessons together, lessons that most of the time arrive when it's already too late. But today, you and I laid them out before life corners you. and if you look closely, they all share one thread. Stop living on autopilot and start living with awareness, with dignity, with lightness. We talked about taking the wheel of your life without waiting for rescuers, about learning to let go in time, about caring for your body as your first capital, about realizing that hardly anyone thinks about you as much as you think, about the strength of boundaries and the wealth of invested time. We discovered that character matters more than image, that accumulating things steals life, that money without peace is useless, and that friendships that lift you up are worth more than 100 empty contacts. We also saw that forgiveness starts with you, that solitude can be a workshop for the soul, that speaking the uncomfortable saves relationships, and that envy, if used well, becomes a compass. We looked at death as a teacher of life, understood that purpose is serving, that saying no without guilt is self-respect, that asking for help is strength, and that taking care of your mental narrative is the true art of inner freedom. I want to thank you sincerely for staying until now. This channel exists to remind you that no matter your age or circumstances, there is always a path toward wisdom, always space for calm and self-love. I'm Gabriel, and this space, the Stoic Garden, is here to walk with you on that journey. Now, I'd love for you to tell me which country you're watching from. I enjoy seeing how this community is being woven from different corners of the world. And let me suggest a phrase to seal today's lesson. I live with wisdom. Write it in the comments. Let it be recorded as a commitment to yourself. And if this video resonated with you, share it with a friend, a sister, or someone who might need these words right now. You never know when a message like this could be the encouragement someone's been waiting for. Thank you for being here, for giving me your time and your attention. On screen, you'll now see 2 more videos that I'm sure will interest you. Choose the one that calls to you most, and keep walking this path of practical wisdom and a fuller life.